So please.
Yeah, these are options. That's why, as I said, fortunately, I don't need to take care of all these things because I'm teaching for my passion, but I'm working. So I don't need to make a career. I was invited several times from my university to make some training track to become a permanent professor. But I have to move to South Bend and never go there because I need a therapist to survive. It's such a depressive place. I told them, I invited me for 2 years, South Bend for 3 years, and South Bend you have the tenure. I said, are you paying? No, okay, I don't. Living in a county where you have 6 months a year, that dirty ice on the floor, and dirty streets, trees with no leaves. It's very, very depressing. I can't survive it. So I'm not following too much this situation, which I know it's very, very hard because I have a friend of mine who ran for the PhD or for the tenure track. But they were forced to spend a fortune. At the end, what is good for them is that the university, because if you are doing these things, you can enroll for some grant that you will spend for this publication. And this is the reason why, and this is the reason why these accredited publishers are abusing, because they know that if they ask you for 1,000 euros, this is honestly unfair.
Not that detailed work, it's just a mini putting in the hard work and then paying a fortune for that doesn't make sense.
Private university, there is also a disgusting habit that when a certain professor opened a position for researcher, official researcher paid, because I was not paid, even if I was taking care of the students. 1 year I had 7 students. The professor I was working with, actually, how much I believe in it, but the project was, in any case, not...
Okay, good morning. The lesson today is an exercise I do with my students. I put all this information in one presentation, but in reality is an exercise we do in 4 days, let's say in 4 weeks, because I go 1 day per week with the students walking into the city of Rome. Because I think it's important to understand how we can design the future city simply reading the existing one, which doesn't mean to copy, but is to understand the dynamics of the urbanism and also what are the rules that are guiding a proper urbanism. Rome is considered the most beautiful place ever, but Rome has also a lot of problems. And Rome is not only the historical center of Rome, which is pretty large, but clearly is not the only Rome. If you remember my presentation where I shown very quickly the evolution of the city of Rome, you have seen that the city of Rome of the ancient Roman time at a certain point was abandoned, and the life remained only in the triangle of the Campus Martius, which was the place where the aqueducts were bringing water. But then with this expansion of the city after the unification of Italy, the kind of city that was produced was far away from the original one. It has a completely different rules. It is based on the grid. It still has a good elevation in the building, even if there is a typical monotony of the 19th century architecture. And then this is something that brought the inhabitants of Rome to refuse that kind of city, that kind of buildings, because they were considering boring. They were considering not merely Roman buildings. Indeed, they were following the model of the Piedimontese architecture in the very north of Italy, on the borderline with France. Cities which are possible to be made when you are dealing with a flat land, but when you have some topography, working with the grid is a problem. As I said, it was the bankruptcy of the Comune di Roma because of the immense costs of regularization of the land in order to allow this grid standing, with big damages to the existing buildings that remain nearby the new axis that sometimes appear sunken. Next to, on Via Nazionale, for instance, there is a church of San Vitale that today is good 7 meters below the level of the street. So it's a beautiful medieval church, but nobody take care about the existence of that church because it's sunken, has been completely obliterated below the new city of Rome. Because of these problems related with the grid, related with this kind of architecture, with the enclosed blocks, etc., as you remember, I was talking about this great shift made at the beginning of the 20th century when it was codified a new kind of building type to repair the problems of the urbanism. The architects on those days were saying, since the urbanists forgot the spaces for gathering people, we made the space for gathering people into the blocks. So they made these large courtyard districts, and they also tried, where this was possible, to create some radial, counter-radial axes that were breaking the monotony of the grid. And this is what I can define the third Rome, the Rome that is trying to repair to the damages of the ideology of Beaux-Arts time. But then there is a fourth Rome, which is the visionary city of Rome. Is a kind of city that in reality was not planned to be a city for people, but it was planned to be a place for the universal exhibition of 1942 that never happened because of the Second World War. But in any case, even if it was planned to celebrate the fascist era, it was built after the Second World War because that kind of city promoting the fascist era, which was not a city but it was just a parade typical of this kind of universal exhibition, was perfect matching the idea of celebrating the city for car. And it is not a case if the construction of the EUR district in Rome was sponsored by the Fiat car producer, because that was the first time where a city planned only for cars was realized in Italy. And when the master plan for the EUR was made in 1939, so during the fascist time, and they started the construction of new road that was linking the center of Rome to the site of EUR, they gave for the first time a name to a route, autostrada, motorway, highway, if you wish. So, what is interesting with this study I made with my students is that they can understand that Rome is not only one Rome, it's 4 Rome, but there is also the 5th one, but it's honestly that ugly that is better not to be studied, even if, in my opinion, it is necessary to have the full range of possibility to understand the positive and the negative effect. Because in the city that I can define the 5th Rome, we have this horrible architecture, which are much more than architecture, merely buildings. But somewhere you still have the presence of commercial activities and things that in some way are trying to keep the life along the street. While something that came later, especially the architecture, the urbanism developed after the 60s, with the new master plan of 1962, and all the urban code that brought these new ideas of minimum standard, and especially the creation of the zoning with the master plan of 1962. The other Rome is the one that has the district only for the houses, the district only for the shops, the district only for schools, etc., which is making the city that. So here you can see the walk, the stroll I do with my students, and intentionally the first class it is focusing on, depends on the number of students, because I repeat the class twice a week, because when I have students like this year, I have 55 students, I can't walk with the 55 students, so I make one presentation on Wednesday morning and one presentation on Friday morning with the 2 different groups. This is something that in any case allow me in the 4 hours walk we have to cover different places. And the analysis of the historical center of Rome is fundamentally important to understand how the city is an organism. And as I said a few days ago, the design of a piazza itself without understanding that the piazza belongs to an urban sequence, belongs to a network, it's a nonsense, because a wonderful piazza where you have to go with the helicopter, as I said a couple of days ago, is not a piazza. A piazza is a place where you will walk safely, where you will find all the possible activities, and you are happy to walk. And this brings to the idea that the city is not 3-dimensional, but is 4-dimensional, because time plays a very important role. The way you can rhythm the walk from one place to another, the way you can attract the view to bring people from one place to another is fundamentally important. Because when we will do these sequences, and in this case you can see on the upper left corner the historical center with the 5 sequences converging on the Pantheon, you will see that there is an incredible variety of spaces. Then you can see on the right side the city of the post-unification, the city of the grid made by the Piedimontese, where the spaces are immense. The scale of representation of these 2 plans are not the same. To have a sequence, because they completely forgot in intentionally because the cost of land, as I told you, were immense. So making piazze was meaning wasting money, and the surfaces for the piazza was paid by the municipality that indeed got bankrupt. So the size of that walk is something that is immense, because distances are immense. And at the end you have to invent a way to turn a street, because there is no building that is making any reference. You walk on this straight street flanked by beautiful building, we will see, but with a series of problems I'm going to highlight. That kind of city that was not appreciated by the inhabitants of Rome, which by the way were coming from all around Italy, because the Rome of post-unification is the Rome of the immigrants coming from all around Italy, where the south of Italy was the richest part of Europe before the unification, and was transforming the third world. So people get really poor and were forced to migrate toward Rome. They were not enjoying these spaces. So the architects of those days, Giovannoni in primis, understood very well what was the problem, and understood that it was necessary to work not with the grid, but it was necessary to work with more winding streets, which were also saving money because you were respecting the topography. And this means that when you make a design, you have to visit the site, you have to conceive your project on site, you have to understand, you have to figure out how much does it cost, the flattening of a planet, which is insane. And at that point you can take advantage of the topography to create winding places and to identify the places where you have the possibility to put some landmark that is working to attract and redirect people, as we are going to see in the following images. So the Rome of the third moment, which is the early 20th century Rome, is the Rome that works with these courtyard, and you can see in the bottom left corner a little fragment of the District Trionfale, where the space of the street are immense, also because of the creation of the immense route that was linking to the stadium where the Olympic Games of 1960s were made. So today it looks even wider than what it was. So the big void you can see on the left of that space is a giant roundabout, it's not a piazza. But you can see that inside the courtyard, inside the blocks, there are a large courtyard where people can walk, where kids are playing, where elders found a place to stay. The last one on the bottom left, on the bottom right, is the main axis of the EUR district, which is this district built for the exhibition I told you, where the space is even bigger than the one of the second Rome of post-unification. Just to have an idea of the dimension, the main street in the center, the width of that street is a little bit more than 100 meters. 100 meters for a street, obviously, it's something that is not designed for humans, it's designed for driving with your car. So what is happening in the center of Rome? Look at the incredible complexity of this organism, and notice also how all these routes in some way are leading to the Pantheon. The Pantheon is the round building there. And notice that no one of the access to the Pantheon, I didn't highlight the other access, I do sometime when I want to have a class that is covering all the possibilities to get to the Pantheon. There are 9 entrances in the Piazza del Pantheon, but no one of these is in access with the Pantheon, which means that one of the most important things that is in the urban city, in the urban spaces we like, we love, tourists wants to visit, is based on the surprise effect. The way you discover something, you walk, you discover something, and say, wow, there is that, let me go there. And then you get closer and you realize that somewhere there is something else that is happening. This is making the walk extremely pleasant. Guess that when I make this class with my students and we walk for 4 hours, they are absolutely not tired. They would like to see more and more and more. When all the senses are involved in our stroll, we are not feeling tired. When we make the second class in the city of the grip, after 15-20 minutes, they get bored because it's everything the same. There is nothing that is bringing their attention, inviting to go somewhere instead of stay where they are. So how this works? This is a quite interesting plan. I hope the light allows you to read it, because this is the cadaster made under the Pope Gregory, which is the first document made in scale 1 to 1000, and it follows the same logic of the Noldi map I mentioned a couple of days ago. And you can see. But what I'd like to show you is that, as you can see, obviously, the monument, the ancient monument, the Pantheon in this case is represented in black because these are ancient Roman ruins. But if you see the blocks, in addition to the courtyard, for instance here, you can see that there is the drawing, the plan shows the interior of the church, the interior of this church, the interior of this space, the interior of this church, the way to get to the courtyard of this cloister. So what is the great invention of the Nolli map is the fact that within the fabric, which is ancient, in this case is pink, in Nolli is black. But what is interesting is that within a block, you can imagine the way buildings are part of the public space, the way the public space penetrate into the block, which means that I can immediately say, okay, this piazza belongs to this church because it's anchored to the piazza. The church, the space, looks like a covered piazza, but it's really one piece. And this, urbanistically speaking, when we make a design, allow us to identify already from the master plan the logic, the strategy of the master plan, and the way we can justify spaces for gathering people, and we can justify the presence of special buildings that are emerging from the mass of the fabric. Indeed, in Italian, the monumental building, the church, the palazzo, or whatever, it is called emergenza, which is not an emergency, but is something that is emerging from the mass. And so, when I show you the model of my project, talking about a public build, res publica and res privata or economica, I'm talking about the emergenze, those buildings that are emerging from the mass that need to be widespread in order to have a city that is, wherever you go, interesting. Because if you concentrate all the most important things in a historical center or in the center, or as the American says, downtown, and the rest is fabric, that's not a city. It's some concentration of interest in one point, and the rest of the city is considered secondary. While we can't have a city with a district of class A, district of class B, and this is of class Z. All the inhabitants deserve to be treated in the same manner. All the inhabitants deserve beauty. All the inhabitants deserve to have spaces for gathering. So, this first sequence, arbitrary, because at the end I can start from kilometers and kilometers, start from that arrow there. And this is something that allows the students to see how this narrow alley leads straight to the entrance of that church. So notice how that facade, it is perfectly anchored. It's really the idea that this regional axis that is becoming local axis can enter into that building and can become architectural axis. It's super powerful. And the facade looks perfectly bilaterally symmetrical, because this is another problem that Beaux-Arts way and modernist way caused, this slavery of bilateral symmetry. When Vitruvio is talking about the symmetry, he's talking about the harmony of the spaces. He's not talking about the bilateral symmetry. The bilateral symmetry is one possibility, And historically speaking, it's a pity that we miss the possibility to have the class on religious architecture with Professor Capo. Because religious architecture can teach us that whatever kind of religion you are dealing with, since the ancient Egyptian time, since the ancient Maya and Azteca time, shows that the axiality, the bilateral symmetry, is a way to talk about sacred axis. The sacred axis, because when you have these alignments, you have apparently the concentration of all the positive forces on that axis. In a religious building, you need to do that. And it's not the case if the first bilaterally symmetrical composition in Roman architecture, in urban space, is the photo of Julius Caesar, when Julius Caesar tried to celebrate himself as a god alive in a society that it was not allowing that. In Egypt, where he fell in love with this idea, this was possible, but was not possible in the Roman world. So what he made was to make a temple, which was the first temple with an apse. The apse was there to work also as a buttress for the rock of the Capitoline. But he put a statue of the goddess Venus Genitrix, Venus the mother, let's say, the one that generates the dynasty, Julio Claudia, his dynasty. And outside in the piazza, following this rectilinear axis of symmetry, he put the statue of himself on a horse, facing the eyes of the goddess. And this was a way in Alexandria, in the Hellenistic world, was the way of sacralizing something. So in a church, in a temple, you do need to have the bilateral symmetrical composition. But in the city, this is something that is not necessarily the right way. Also because working with the bilateral symmetry, many times we lose the possibility to give a special value to building, because we don't understand that probably a corner condition has, in terms of real estate, much more value than something that is perfectly axial. So we need to consider this. And it's not a case if moving that forward, you will see that this bilateral symmetry disappears. There is something that is happening. There is the drum of the dome that is happening, and we will discover that the drum of the dome there, at the end, works as a kind of hinge, a kind of pivot, where the city changes. But in any case, it's something that also suggested the stroll. Because look at the way we are arriving from this narrow street. At that point, we can decide where we can go. But there is a wall that is chamfered, that is inviting to walk on the right side. So it really, when you walk there in this narrow fabric, you feel to be in a canyon, modeled by the power of the water that brings you somewhere. And indeed, moving forward, and here you can see that piazza and all this, the entrances, but also the axis of the space, you will see that when you turn, you have that palazzo there. And this palazzo apparently is symmetrical, but then you realize that you have 2 bays on one side and 3 bays on the other side. But nobody is suffering because there is this asymmetry, if that is asymmetry. Because obviously, in a building, there are spaces that are disengaged in the apartment. And if you put the staircases in one side, and then you lose the possibility to have a connection because of the presence of the staircase, the building doesn't work. So it's necessary to have an interior that is using properly all the space. And at the end, the facade is the consequence of what is happening inside. On the wall here, I read a functions model, the exterior, or something like that. Yes, it's true. We can't have a building that are starting from outside and go inside. We need to have a building that are starting from inside to have the proper use. And then the great challenge of ours as an architect is to make a beautiful facade that is also making a beautiful exterior of a perfect interior. When you are there and you are coming, this is the route, At certain point, if you see the plan, you can decide I turn left or I go roughly right. Clearly, when I will be there, notice how I have an invitation to continue my walk in that narrow alley there. The facade, the opening is made in a manner that I don't feel any interruption. No matter if it is winding, I know what is the main way to go, because there is a building that is shifted a little bit down in that direction in order to show the continuity. So I take that street at that point, which is this, the entrance, and I have a straight axis that apparently brings very perfectly straight. In reality, it's a little bit winding. And when you have this thin winding condition, you have the possibility to appreciate in oblique the elevation. You have the possibility to appreciate the different level. But also notice how, at certain point at the very end, no matter if you have enough light or not, you feel that the space is getting wider. You have the presence of a piazza that is attracting your view. You go there, and in fact, you find the piazza with this palazzo, and there is a church on the other side. At this scale of image, probably is not possible to be seen, but on the very left side here, there is something that is already visible. So this is when you are in the piazza. These are all the entrances in this other piazza. And by the way, I didn't underline till now that all these piazze are always flanked by the streets, are never crossed by the street. I told that the way to enter in the Piazza del Pantheon is not in axis, which means that the piazza is not crossed by a central street. But this is happening everywhere. So at this point, we have two options in that piazza, but clearly we want to go there, because when you are in the piazza, look at what you can see. There is a glimpse of the Pantheon that says, hey, here I am, come here. You are really immediately attracted to that view, and you, even if you are in the piazza, you can turn right. You want to go straight there, because there is this little landmark that is bringing you there. At that point, you can see also how the facade of this apparently rectilinear street bends a little bit. It seems like there is a magnet that is deforming the urban fabric. And finally, you arrive in the Piazza del Pantheon. And you arrive in the Piazza del Pantheon not in axis, but a little bit shifted on the left side. Since these are all the 9 entrances I was mentioning earlier, you can see the yellow axis of the Pantheon that is not continuing into a street, because it's not that the meaning. This is the entrance for the other street, if we want to go there. It's quite interesting too, but it's really limited to the space between one piazza and the other. It's not belonging to these sequences we were walking through. This is another sequence that goes from Piazza di Montecitorio to the Pantheon. And here I prefer, instead of using images, to use some drawings made by some of my students, because this is one of the most successful way to understand also the issue of the containment of the space and the issue of the geometry of the space. Because Leon Battista Alberti used to say that the city is like a large house where the piazze are the rooms and the streets are the corridor. And if that is true, and it is true, it is something that can be roofed. A piazza that has a weird shape needs to be reconfigured in a manner that is giving the possibility to maintain some way of roofing, which means that it's necessary to create a hierarchy. And this hierarchy could be simply made with the insertion of some feature that is dividing the space. Piazza Montecitorio is probably the best example. In this drawing of my student following my explanation, it is clear that the location of this obelisk that was brought in Rome by Augustus in the 98 AD and displayed for the Orologium Solaris, the sundial, then refounded, whatever. When it was fixed there,
the location was made on purpose to be, if you see, the piazza has almost this T-shape. The location of the obelisk in the edge between the two piazze is immediately creating some separation, even if the space is still that. And you have this ideal screen that is making this separation. What is interesting that is already visible from this view, there is another view before this one I didn't put. What is interesting is that when you are in the piazza and you are coming closer to the obelisk, because this view made by the student it has the dimension of a kind of grandangular photo. It's not the dimension on the very visual cone. Our visual cone is 60 degrees. So when you are in the piazza, you watch the obelisk, you have the obelisk, but when the obelisk with our visual cone start fading, let's say, start going out of sight, there is another thing that is appearing. Look at the dome of that little church that appears. So at that point, you are interested to walk in that direction. And when the dome is disappearing, there is the bell tower corner that appears, which is another thing that is suggesting to walk in that direction. You arrive to the next piazza, and this piazza is pretty rectangular. You can see in the plan, it's a little bit more diamond shape. What is interesting is that there is one opening that is really like a cone that goes in one direction, and even the floor slopes just a little bit down. So if we go back to this metaphor of the river and the canyon, it seems like the urbanism has been modeled by this powerful flow of water and the slope that is walking in that direction for some reason that we don't know yet. But what is interesting is that in the narrow space, thanks to this opening, from the piazza it's possible to see two palazzi, one next to the other, because the palazzo that is in the narrow alley there is almost entirely visible from these very little things. So we are in some way invited to walk left instead of continuing walk straight, as you can see from this image. And then when we approach the center of the space that is there, we can see in this incredibly narrow space the corner column of the Pantheon that is attracting in that direction. And at that point, you walk up to there, and step by step, you will discover the Pantheon. The third sequence it starts from Piazza Colonna, and actually, in reality, I generally bring the student from the other course, so from this side. But in any case, you can see there is a very rectilinear, rectangular piazza, which is the piazza where the side elevation of the temple of deified Adrian stands. When you are in this space, you can see this very narrow alley, but look at the very bright building at the end and the space that appeared larger, how stimulated the interest in walking in that direction. The more you get closer, the more you can see some feature. And then you enter in the piazza, you can see the colonnade of the temple of the deified Adrian, which is fantastic, stand on one side. But then you enter into the piazza and you realize that the piazza has an invitation to continue to walk on the left side. As you can see, there is a facade, but there is a building that bends on the left side like the one we have seen. But notice on the upper right corner, the presence of the Altana. The Altana is one of the most beautiful moments in Roman urbanism and architecture. The Altane at the very beginning were simply the spaces where to protect in winter the wheat, far from the rats and protected from the rain, so at the top of the building. But then this at a certain point became some kind of a symbol of wellness. So many palazzi were showing on the top of the building this kind of temple or kiosks, if you wish, like a building over the building. And what is interesting is that these elements are not standing on the facade, are not standing on the street, but are set back, generally just above the staircases that is leading up. And it's something that in any case is a way to work as a landmark in the urban fabric. There are many beautiful like that. But also what is interesting to be noticed is that the Altana is not on the left side of the palazzo, but is on the right side. This is going back to what I was talking about, the symmetria, eurythmia, all these words used by Vitruvius. Because at the end, if the Altana was nearby the left corner, was too close to the Temple of the Deified Alien, it was a concentration of force, while it was much better to balance the urban space. So it's very, very useful that the building has the Altana there. I don't know if you can see with this light, with this screen, but the building, which by the way is also closed here, there is no street there, so there is just this possibility to walk. But notice in the grammar of the architecture how the facade is tripartite, 3 elements. This corner has a point of stone. In reality, this is stone, all the rest is false stone. The corner stone, it is getting lighter and lighter moving up, because this is a quotation of the idea of the superimposition of the order of classical architecture. But on this side, the corner doesn't have any protection, because the corner stone is a protection. In the Middle Ages, when enemies were attacking, but even in the past, when enemies were attacking the city walls, they were damaging, they were breaking the corner of the wall, because in this way, the larger part of the wall was falling down. Cracking the wall in the middle, it's something that doesn't work. For this reason, this model that became a model for the tower in the Middle Ages was reused also into the palazzi of Renaissance, because at the end the palazzo starts with the idea of the tower fortress, and then it's getting wider. So I think this is quite a useful element to be taken in consideration. The walk continues in that direction, and as you can see, this idea of the winding canyon is continuing. And even in this case, the street that appears straight bends a little bit in order to direct in that way our stroll. But then when we arrive almost at the end of that sequence, notice how the building on the right side changed completely the direction, because I'm turning like this, and then at the end I have a building that obliges me to turn on the other side. So even in this case, it seems like the urbanism, it is deformed by some magnet that is deciding what could be the right entrance. And indeed, the reason for that is that when we turn the facade, you can see there is a little part of the pediment, and you are in front of the Pantheon in oblique. So in one more time, it's possible to see how the urbanism and the architecture are intimately connected. Another great approach to the city, to the Pantheon, is coming from the piazza, we've seen earlier, but even in this case, I generally enter into the piazza from here, but here I made something that want to show how the model of the Pantheon, the entrance in the piazza, not in axis of the church, was also used by Raguzzini when he designed this spectacular Piazza di Sant'Ignazio. Because you have these palazzi that are made in a manner that are bringing you left and right, and then allow you to enter into the piazza winding in this way, As you can see, the axis of the church is not continuing in any street. And then you have this view with this curvilinear form. I didn't took a picture, and I was wrong, because this piazza I call Mickey Mouse Piazza, because it has these fantastic elliptical hinges that are bringing you into the piazza, that watching from above looks like the face of Mickey Mouse. So you are in front of the Church of Sant'Ignazio, this is the other entrance, and then you have this axis that is bringing you in that direction, that is extremely straight, but notice how it bends a little bit. The palazzo is immense, but it bends a little bit.
And notice how the point where the facade bends, which is visible in this view already, there is a balcony, and there is the main entrance into the building. So the location of that is exactly where this shift happens, which means that we need to conceive three-dimensionally the buildings when we are on site, and we have to conceive four-dimensionally the city to model the stroll. What is interesting is that when you are nearby that entrance, the balcony is almost disappearing, as you can see, and the corner column of the Pantheon stands right in the middle of the axis. So the space is extremely narrow, but the urban moment is so powerful that you don't want to stop. You want to keep walking. You arrive with this view in the Piazza del Pantheon, and you are there. The last sequence I want to see is this one that is entering from Via del Corso in Piazza del Collegio Romano, in this narrow street. Even in this case, you can see how what appears straight in some way bends. This is the Collegio Romano. You enter into the piazza. Unfortunately, today the piazza is used as a parking lot. So there are many requests to remove all this car. On the left side, you have the spectacular Palazzo Pamphili. And the space, the other building beyond, are buildings that have been unfortunately badly transformed in the 19th century with a series of interventions. But in any case, it's possible to see how this space is continuing straight, and the street bends a little bit on the right side. So these are the condition into the piazza. Then you walk in that direction, and you can see how even in this case the urbanism bends. It is turning and turning, and then you arrive here where you can see the side elevation of the church of Minerva. You can see the presence of a piazza there. You arrive in the piazza and you are invited to turn immediately to turn right, because you have the obelisk of Bernini with the elephant, and behind that you can see the dome of the Pantheon, which means that at that point you will decide automatically to turn right and walk toward the Pantheon and enter in the Pantheon from the back and explore the condition of the Pantheon. Now, more quickly, I want to show you what is happening when we approach the city of the post-unification, where I arbitrarily decided a walk, a stroll, because there is nothing that is working as a reference. And as I told you, after 15 minutes, my students, which were extremely interested in the first visit to the center and walking for 4 hours without getting tired, here, after 20 minutes, not more, they say, what is the meaning? The space is completely uncontained. It's really a space that someone that suffered from agoraphobia suffered. Now it's even worse because the present mayor decided to cut off all these trees from there. So you have a big, immense void into the city. And you have anything that is working as a reference. In the very back you can see the railway station Termini. So I walk on that direction arbitrarily. I pass nearby the Museo di Palazzo Massimo. And then at a certain point I decide to turn and take Via Cavour, which is one more time something that I decide arbitrarily, because there is nothing that is inviting to walk there. What I've discovered in this city of the 19th century is that, as I told you, the architecture is not bad. It's monotonous. There is the problem that they have one block, one building, even if inside these are many buildings, because you can't imagine to have a condo with this size only with one set of staircase. So this idea of the palazzo that is inflated like the wheel of a bicycle to be adapted to the side is completely wrong, because that is not corresponding, is not a facade that corresponds to the type. But the worst problem that is happening here, and in this case we are dealing with the real estate, is the fact that I don't know if the light allows you to appreciate this, but here you have the pizzeria. Okay? This is a shop that you can use it. This is the entrance. But look at all these windows are at this level.
So these are shop doors that are not possible to be used as a shop door. Because when you don't want to take care about the topography, but the building must be horizontal, and you don't want to make different floors, different steps in the floor, which means that the ground floor of this is here, the ground floor of this must be lower, you have shop doors that are impossible to be used. So you waste space, but you most than anything else, you waste the money of your clients. Because these are super profitable shops. Not using as a shop is ridiculous. And this means that would have been better to understand that it would be probably necessary to have one palazzo adjacent to another palazzetto with the different levels, making variety in the facade, having a strong topography which is not visible if you watch at the corners because the buildings are all the same. It's a pity. It's really the murder of the urban space where people love to explore and find things. Then we arrive to this intersection, and I decide to turn simply because there is the church of Santa Maria Maggiore. Unfortunately, something that you can't, you don't know obviously, is that historically speaking, from 1580, in 1580, Pope Pius V made one of the most important master plan of the world, let's say, which was the Piano Sistino, and he created this powerful axis that is Via Merulana in this case, that was coming from Piazza di Spagna, so the Spanish Step. In reality was coming from Piazza del Popolo, where you have the first trident, was passing to Piazza di Spagna, Spanish Step, was arriving to the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore, and it was continuing, not like this, but like this, was going down to San Giona del Lateran on one side, and Santa Croce in Jerusalem on the other side. Something that was completely wiped out by those people that were considering the stinky, filthy, dirty Rome. This was the idea of the king after unification. And they made this master plan just to have a business. And they completely canceled the most important axis of the place, which was this one. And so, when you arrive from via Cavour, you have the width of Via Cavour that is immense. It's at least 3 times the width of the main axis. So the meaning of a hierarchy is completely lost. But also the meaning of the axis, because this axis, all these axes made by Pius V were made for leading the pilgrim to the different basilicas of Rome. So from Piazza del Popolo to the Spanish Step to Santa Maria Maggiore, from Santa Maria Maggiore to San Giovanni del Lateran and Santa Croce in Jerusalem. This is now completely lost. And this is not the right way to make an urbanism that is respectful of place and respectful of history and strategies. So at that point, arbitrarily, we walk on the left side, simply because I know where I have to go. And you can see, even in this case, all the ground floor of building is not possible to be used as a shop, but that's another story. And at the end, there is a modern building, but volumetrically speaking works. Aesthetically speaking, has nothing to do with Rome. It's this building here. So the volume, the proportion, I think that's fine. There are also shops on the ground floor, but aesthetically speaking, in front of the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore, next to the column there, it's really something that has, it's a missing opportunity. Then it starts this stroll here that brings to Piazza Vittorio Emanuele, where we have these very large buildings, and now in this picture, I don't know if you can appreciate that, you have back the problem of the city of the 19th century, where because they were working these immense blocks with one block, one building, they made these blocks where 8-10 apartment blocks were fused within one unique facade. Now these are several condos, and you can see that the owners of this part made a that you have a facade with 3 up to 5 different colors. If you read all the halls in black and white, you can say, okay, this is one building. But when you see the colors, you realize how architect has to prevent human stupidity, or in any case, human behavior. Because at the end, when you have every condo that is owned by, let's say, 20 families, and you have 5 condos, you have 100 families to put together to make the restoration all together. This will never happen. And this is absurd. At that point, it's better to break the facade in 5 buildings as it was, as it is, instead of being slaves of this idea of working with a bilateral symmetry for nothing. What I can do?
You start the